Hello there and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I'm Vlad and my guest today is someone very special who has been coding a couple of years before he had his first computer, which was an IBM XT from the 1980s. He used to write programs in pen and paper and he taught himself assembly language. And then around the age 15 or 16, he was talking with Adam Back and Hal Finney on IRC, trying to solve the double spending problem to basically invent Bitcoin. And then when Bitcoin was finally discovered...
Not quite on IRC, on the mailing list.
Okay, it was the mailing list. You ruined the
Sky
surprise.
Mailing list. Yeah, ruined it.
Now people have seen your face and they're going to be like, it's not like it's not in the title anyway. But
yeah,
where does the story go from here? You worked with analog electronics, which you admitted that are puzzling and a lot more difficult than digital stuff. And
analog is good fun, full of black magic.
Started working on Bitcoin, and I guess some of your first contributions concern mostly reporting issues and finding possible threats, and that has been a constant throughout your career.
Yep.
You're the guy that people used to listen to when you would identify a 1 in a million vulnerability and you'd be like, this can actually happen, even if it's rare. And it seems like as the project has grown, maybe that you have distanced yourself and you have chosen to do other stuff. But not many people who got in 2020 or 2021 know who you are. And then when you started basically posting about stuff that you have been saying for years about Bitcoin needing some sort of inflation to sustain.
Oh, yeah. The tail emission post. Yeah,
exactly. To make up for the diminishing block subsidy, you were under fire. You were attacked. You were called a spook. You were called all sorts of names. And it seems like people forgot.
I mean, to be clear, what happened was a bunch of people said a bunch of shit on Twitter.
Sure.
That's not really under fire. That's a bunch of people saying a bunch of shit on Twitter.
It's good that it doesn't get to you, but at the same time, it's also useful to understand why we are making why we are having these discussions, which maybe are going to become relevant in 20 or 30 years. Or less, as you're trying to boost the importance of. By the way, you wrote like a mathematical proposal and the math actually checks out. I'm not saying this as a mathematical authority.
To be clear, I didn't write a mathematical proposal. I wrote a paper going and showing how there is some math around tail emission. It works a particular way. I didn't specifically say that Bitcoin should adopt tail emission. I said there is an option where Bitcoin could go do this. And I didn't even give like specific numbers on how Bitcoin could do this. Which is interesting how people go take talking about something in the Bitcoin field to automatically be, we're going to go do this.
Yeah, and it's only that people listen to influencers talking and they have no idea how it works. They only understand. So I'm going to go and reference, I'm not sure if he was your friend, but you seemed affected by his death last year. His name is Dan Kaminsky. And he had this famous quote that in every system, there are those who actually understand how it works because they work with it, and those who only get abstractizations and theories and narratives about what that system is. And it's pretty much the same in the case of Bitcoin. And
I know almost nothing about Dan Kaminsky. I vaguely remember the name. That's about it. If I remember correctly, the thing that got the most attention for, at least in the part of Twitter that I'm involved in, or that I go see, was how he was a diabetic who I think had just gotten vaccinated against COVID and died soon after that. And there is some potential link between those two.
Well, but
that's a part of Twitter I got to saw. I don't really know much about what he's done for like security stuff. I know he's kind of been involved in that
in 2011 or something, or 2010.
Well, everyone tries to break Bitcoin.
But he wrote an article about it. How I tried to break Bitcoin and I failed. And he detailed how the design was a lot better than he expected.
Well, anyone saying goes tries to break Bitcoin. And the fact Bitcoin still exists means they must have all failed.
Pretty much, yes. But I mentioned him why did I mention him? You interrupted me, and I lost my train of thought.
Well, should have written it down.
So the idea is that people listen to influencers too much, and they don't listen to developers. As I've heard last year at the Atlanta Bitcoin conference, Andrew Polstra and a bunch of other Bitcoin Core developers like Andrew Chow and Peter Willey expressing concern about the diminishing block subsidy. And that's something that they talk about, and that's something for which they try to find solutions. It's not a popular topic to discuss in public, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that developers don't do it. And that's something that I guess the community needs to understand, that Bitcoin needs to have proposals for improvements and issues need to be addressed, and no system is perfect. And it's also software that people use however they want to. It's not this glove that people put on their hand and it's supposed to keep you warm and that's its only purpose. It's software that serves the purpose of however people use it.
Well, I mean, I think like the big thing with the block subsidy is, as the name suggests, it's a subsidy. And the way it's paid is by effectively a tax on your savings. You know, the fact that we're inflating Bitcoin right now means that there's, well, with current figures, approximately like 1.7% inflation rate, you know, monetary inflation rate. And that means 1.7% of your Bitcoins every year are going off to pay for security. Like, it's a tax and people don't like taxes. And unfortunately in Bitcoin, I think people become sort of extremely like religious about this stuff to the point where like even, you know, inflating Bitcoin by like one single Satoshi will be the end of everything. And, you know, it's like, it's hard to go talk to people like that because it's not, you know, they're not talking about it in a rational way. They're talking about it as sort of a number go up, you know, very militant religious way. And I think the only part of that you can kind of talk about in a rational way is really, well, what is the process by which you go change this? See, block size is quite similar in that you want to think very carefully about what is the process by which block size may be increased, and do you have a good reason for it? And the last time we had the block size wars, of course, there wasn't a process for block size being increased. It was anything near reasonable. You know, the only reasonable approach there is to try everything you can that doesn't involve harming decentralization and then go look at the alternatives. But that's not what is being proposed. Whereas, you know, here people are looking at it from the opposite way of, well, all right, what options do we really have to go pay for fees and stuff? And, you know, how safe is this and so on? But yeah, it's a mess of a topic to go discuss.
At the same time, it's worth noting that we did increase the block size with SegWit. And
yeah, we did. And we very cleverly did it in a way where that block size increase could only happen once, which was part of the reason why it was acceptable. You know, there was no way to go do it again.
Yeah, of course. And it was also done in a way that maybe people who don't agree with it can still participate in the network. So
no, they really can't.
Consensus.
No, I mean, it happens to be soft fork, but, you know, to go say soft forks means you can still fully participate if you don't agree is a bit silly. You know, I don't think that's
everyone is going
fair
to get
say.
pushed to adopt the latest version, right?
Well, I mean, you know, you're not fully participating unless you're fully validating. That's just the reality of it. So, you know, SegWit was a way for miners to do something where they could go push off the people who refuse to, you know, refuse to go agree with this new thing. And then they're stuck not being able to fully validate. You know, right. It's just that soft forks can only implement this type of block size increase basically once per thing like SegWit.
Mm-hmm. And it's the same with Taproot, which, by the way, has a pretty low adoption rate at the moment.
Well, it has very high adoption rate in terms of validation. There's a low adoption rate in terms of people actually using it. But, you know, the adoption rate for validation is very high.
Yeah, that's because we have all of these full node implementations that can be installed on your Raspberry Pi. And most people updated their software but had no idea how any of that works. We don't have actual user interfaces for wallets, as far as I know.
No, there's a bunch of wallets that use Taproot. I mean, I go use wallets that go use Taproot. Some Lightning wallets go use it. I mean, people don't go and do complex things with it, but people never did, particularly complex things with multi-sig and so on for the most part. It's fine if, that's not getting used to its full advantage, but, people can go use it later.
Mm-hmm.
And you never expect Taproot adoption to hit 100% for, you doing complex things with Taproot. It's just not the way this stuff works. A lot of use cases are simple. And gradually Taproot adoption will increase, and that's fine.
At the same time, there used to be so much irrational exuberance about what Taproot is and what it does. I remember when it activated that people were celebrating the end of blockchain analysis.
Well, it's the beginning of the end of blockchain analysis. That's fine. That's not a wrong thing to say. It just takes a while. I mean, after all, Binance by default continues to reuse addresses. Anything celebrating, the end of blockchain analysis is ignoring something like that if that's how you're truly interpreting it. But certainly the beginning of it ends. Taproot helps that go away. That's a part of it. It's not the beginning, it's not the final stage there, but it's an important step. So it certainly makes analysis a lot harder for people to actually use it.
What's your favorite Taproot wallet? One that you use and one that you recommend?
Well, I mean, I wind up using Taproot through things like LND, which have Taproot addresses. And gradually more and more of LND will use more of Taproot. That's fine. I don't need to jump right into Taproot for everything right away. But
you mean
over
that
time,
you're using LND on your laptop?
Yeah. Yeah, on my laptop and on some servers and so on. I do quite a lot of Lightning payments through LND.
It's interesting because I spoke with Thomas Vogtlin last week from Electrum, and he was also a big fan of using Lightning in a passive way, which means that you don't route payments. You only run it when you need to send a payment.
Well, I mean, if you run LND on a laptop with reasonably large channels and just leave the laptop on overnight, it'll wind up routing payments anyway. Not a lot of them, but people will wind up routing payments through you. I mean, I've seen this happen, just literally installing LND with large channels between, different parts, and payments just wind up getting routed. It just happens.
Mm-hmm. Something that I want to ask you about Lightning is, how are you so friendly about it? I know that you had your own proposal about something similar to Lightning, and you just embraced it. You were like, okay, this is a better design, I'm going to use it, as opposed to being bitter and saying I had a better idea.
Why would I be bitter about someone implementing something better? What you're basically saying is, yeah, I'm not a fucking asshole. Gee, great, okay. There's nothing hard about this. It's that they did something much better. Good.
I mean, sure, it sounds a lot like the cypherpunk spirit in which people would just embrace the better option. But at the same time, you spent a lot of time working on that, proposing, thinking, and I guess you did not invent Bitcoin, you did not invent Lightning, but you're close with both.
Yeah, and I could go and choose to be bitter about all kinds of things people did better than me. Why on earth would you go do that? It's a stupid way to live your life. I tried to invent Bitcoin when I was in high school, and Satoshi came along and did something far better than I came up with. Good. Now I can go move on and go and build stuff on top of Bitcoin. Why am I going to continue running with my broken ideas that just weren't as good? It's just silly.
Golden Bitcoin on Voltaro, golden Bitcoin on Voltaro, golden Bitcoin on Voltaro, golden Bitcoin on Voltaro.
Voltaro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There is no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip. And if you're into gold custody, Vaultoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Vaultoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015, they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to vaultoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels.
That's a fair point. And I did see that in the past you used to describe yourself as an applied cryptography consultant, and now you go to conferences and your description is Bitcoin developer. So does this mean that you're back to building stuff on Bitcoin?
No, it's just that conferences say all kinds of shit about, what your title is going to be. Like conferences, they'll often go and ask you what, your title should be, but often they don't even bother doing that. They just go suggest one. It's like, all right, fine, you can call me that. The thing I go push back on is when they say Bitcoin core developer, which is not really correct. And and also I was in a lawsuit with Craig Wright that ended recently where whether or not I was Bitcoin core developer was actually very legally relevant. And fortunately that lawsuit's done, so that's no longer legally relevant. But certainly then I really had to go push back, say, no, let's be clear. I'm a former Bitcoin core developer. I haven't actually worked on it for years.
What was the outcome of that lawsuit?
Well, basically, the judge ruled against Craig Wright in pretty much every way possible, and also told him to go and repay our legal fees. Like, it's hard to come up with a better win than that under UK law. So Craig did really, really badly there. I don't know if Craig's actually paid the money back. I don't have the details and all that. I mean, I didn't pay the legal fees myself. Some other people stepped in to donate, but.
But they're gonna get that money back if Craig Wright pays, right?
I mean, maybe not. We'll see. It's not clear Craig Wright's going to pay, so it's not clear how that was all structured to me. But also, Craig Wright has a history of not paying up when courts order him to, so I'm not going to cross my fingers on that. I believe currently HODLNOT is owed quite a lot of money, if I remember correctly.
Was it the exact same case in which other Bitcoin core developers were sued, including Greg Maxwell?
Yeah. That was that one, including Greg Maxwell and Adam Back, and even Roger Ver, if I remember correctly, was part of that case.
Very strange. It's almost as if he was shooting at a larger crowd, hoping to get something out of it.
Well, this particular one, it wouldn't be surprising if the lawsuit was part of a further scam effort, e.g. to say promise to other people that Craig Wright was going to get funds recovered and that's to be able to go pay them back, or to go, keep off creditors a little further by saying, well, we're going to pay you back later, something like that. I mean, it's all a bunch of Craig Wright nonsense, basically, and probably the lawsuit was further a scam of some kind.
Let's get back to stuff that's more interesting than, the guy who sued you, and luckily, or not luckily, but fortunately, you were able to get away without having to pay anything, which would have been the worst case. So I do have like a dozen of questions from people who want to hear stuff from you, but let's finish the topic about your proposal regarding adding tail emission or some sort of extra subsidy for the miners.
To be clear, it's a write-up on how tail emission works. It's not it's not a specific proposal.
Yeah, it's not a bit.
This isn't my proposal for tail emission. This is my write-up on what tail emission does.
It's a what, it's not a how. You did not detail how we can actually do.
I mean, I'm not making a clear statement that Bitcoin should have tail emission. I'm saying if you add tail emission to a coin, here's the property it gets. Now, I think in general, Bitcoin should have had some kind of thing other than the current system. I think you'd want to do more analysis whether tail emission is the right way to do it or, some other way to do it. But certainly the current system of just making the subsidy phase out entirely is just stupid. Like it's putting in a phase change into the system is stupid.
Well, that's the eternal debate that you have between Austrian economists who seem to be more vocal.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with I don't think it has anything to do with Austrian economy or any of that. I think like the fundamentals of this is you need to go pay for security somehow. An obvious way to do it is to go tax people. That's got nothing to do with Austrian economics. That's taxation. Now, as it happens, taxation in this particular case is very easy to implement as inflation. Like there's certain properties of inflation in a cryptocurrency that make this type of taxation easy to implement. Other types of taxation, in other circumstances have very different properties, but in cryptocurrency, this is how this happens to work. And your other option with that economically is equivalent is Demurrage. But Demurrage is just a pile of really annoying accounting, and it makes smart contracts more annoying to write. But you could implement that too, and they're completely equivalent in terms of taking away money from people's savings and using it to go pay for security.
Just for the record, do you also count transaction fees as taxation?
Yeah, of course they are. They wind up working as a type of tax, but the thing with that is, so transaction fees economically are a very regressive tax because they're paid per transaction, and the number of transactions you do doesn't scale by how much coins you have in a system. Like it's interesting how in Bitcoin I forget the exact numbers, but essentially the mean transaction size is much, much larger than the median transaction size. Because you have a bunch of like smaller transactions, but also a bunch of very, very large transactions moving tens of millions of dollars. So it pushes those averages in very different directions. And sure enough, for the average transaction, what they're really paying the most money to is not the transaction fee, it's the fact that they're getting taxed through inflation. This is also why if you take miner revenue divided by number of transactions, that the so-called average transaction cost is much higher than you'd expect. But it's much more affordable than you realize when you look at the fact that, well, the mean transaction has such a high value. If you're moving tens of millions of dollars, paying a transaction fee of $50 isn't really a big deal. Like it's meaningless. And that's effectively what they're paying through inflation.
I did mention this divide between Austrians and cypherpunks because the Austrians expect that taxation to which you refer to go to zero at one point. And they say that the value proposition of Bitcoin is specifically the fixed supply, which is predictable and has this emission that you can determine by looking at every era of how many blocks are there between every 4 years.
Yeah, but having a predictable supply that happens to be done with tail emission is also a fixed supply. I mean, going and having a fixed inflation rate such that, the actual number of coins produced per block goes up slightly over time. That's also a fixed supply. Like, all these things are actually completely compatible with Austrian economics, because what Austrian economics is about is taking away the government's control of the money supply. Austrian economics is not about saying what exactly that monetary supply is. This is why gold can be Austrian. Gold can be Austrian because the government has no control over how much gold you have out there, at least in theory. The fact that gold is continually inflated by digging more gold out of the ground does not make it not Austrian. Much the same way as Monero is completely Austrian, even though it has this tail emission.
So why do you think that relying on block subsidy is not enough to pay the miners? Like, don't you think we can have higher fees or smaller blocks?
Don't you mean relying on transaction fees?
As in getting...
You said block subsidy. You mean transaction fees.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's basically one reason why I'm skeptical of this is that when you look at a pure transaction fee system, there's all kinds of weird game incentives in certain cases where transaction fees come in not a perfectly uniform way, because then miners can be in a position where they can reorg blocks to collect more transaction fees. And that's a really, really serious problem to go have. We do not want miners to have an incentive to reorg blocks to get more fees. And when fees are the only revenue they get, there's a lot of circumstances where that makes sense. The other issue you get is it's not clear that the amount of money spent in total will be enough. And why I say it's not clear is because, well, we just don't know, like, how low can transaction fees go? People always have an incentive to go pay less if it's easy and cheap. And it's not clear, like, how far this goes. I mean, what we've seen is, like, transaction fees went up a lot, and then Lightning got introduced, and then they collapsed. And currently transaction fees are really low compared to sort of recent historical norms. And it's just not clear what will happen later. And I think a lot of my point is that, well, just setting aside a fixed amount of the entire supply is easy and simple to do. And it just doesn't matter. I mean, if your inflation rates, works out to be like 0.1%, if you can't afford to spend like 0.1% of your savings on making sure your savings are safe, like, what are you doing with your life? Like this reminds me of, yield chasing, where people took their Bitcoin and chased a 1% yield to make slightly more money by putting them in these ridiculously risky savings accounts. And of course, they all got wiped out. It's just stupid to do this kind of thing. Equally, it's just stupid to not go pay out some percentage of the total wealth to make sure it's secure. Like, it's premature optimization, really, is one way to put it. You're trying so hard to pay less that you're overlooking the bigger picture.
I agree that the fees are small nowadays, and it's a bit ridiculous when you look at the mempool clear pretty much every day. We do need to have, the blocks filled with transactions and have more demand, which pushes the price of transactions. But at the same time, why do you think that lowering the block size is not an option?
Hang on. Let's be clear. We only need that stuff because we've got ourselves locked into the system, where in the long run that will be the only reason to go mine blocks. Now, if you always had a subsidy, it would be okay if sometimes blocks were empty. That'd be okay. Like, you wouldn't worry about that. Similarly, blowing block size, I mean, maybe the way this works is that the reason why the mempool empties out so often is because the difference in utility from a transaction that reliably confirms the next block or two to a transaction that could take, dozens of blocks to confirm is a very big difference in utility. Maybe it's pretty much useless to do transactions that take ages to confirm, and people are much more interested in doing transactions that are quick. Maybe that's why this has happened. Maybe there just isn't enough demand for unreliable transactions. And we can't assume that there will be. Maybe Lightning will change this, maybe it won't. But Like there's just no reason to to bake in these kinds of assumptions into the system and risk $1 trillion asset for comparatively so little money. Like if you're taking, if you have $1 trillion asset and you're spending like 0.1% of its value every year to make sure it's secure, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And, there's no reason to go, to lock ourselves into going less than that.
Yeah, but some would argue that it will no longer be $1 trillion asset the moment when it adds inflation.
Yeah, and those people are stupid. Like those people are just running off memes. In any rational world, when you look at $1 trillion asset that has value for various reasons, if the $1 trillion asset costs you 0.1% to go and maintain every year, that's fine. Like that's completely fine. No one's going to worry about that. Gold costs money to go keep in a safe, and that doesn't stop gold from being a very valuable asset.
Well, but at the same time, I can argue that the value proposition of Bitcoin relies on these memes, and the people whom you call stupid are the ones who brought these memes into existence.
Well, I would go say that the value proposition that matters is value proposition that Bitcoin's hard to change. Now, had Bitcoin been created from the beginning with, say, tail emission as an example, suppose, from the beginning, it was 1 Bitcoin per block forever. All the same memes about Bitcoin being the store of value, Bitcoin being this unchangeable thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they would work equally well with 1 Bitcoin per block forever.
Yes, but your example is hypothetical. We already have a culture and a meme.
But hang on, but the thing is, I'm not giving a particular example for how you would go and add, as an example, tail emission to Bitcoin. I haven't proposed anything like that. I'm just saying that to think that it's absolutely impossible to do that is stupid. There is probably some way where it's possible to go change this culture. A good example being if Bitcoin starts to fail because this turns out to be a mistake. If this turns out to work, great. But if Bitcoin turns out to begin to fail due to this, well, that's the sort of situation where changing this could be much easier than you'd expect. The other thing, of course, is miners, without the consent of the rest of Bitcoin, they can gradually introduce demurrage in the form of higher transaction fees.
I did see how sometimes exchanges do this to boost transaction fees and to discourage people from making any more transactions. They just fill the mempool with lots of transactions, which they set at a threshold of, let's say, 20 base units. And
to be clear, it's not. We don't understand why exchanges do that. I think the simplest explanation for the times that this has happened is someone has just fat fingered a script that has the ability to go spend millions of dollars. Like a lot of this doesn't seem to have too much rational reasons. The other one is in some cases exchanges may have reasons to deliberately slow down the rate at which transactions can happen to go cover up the fact that maybe they're temporarily insolvent.
Well, that's what I thought, because I did see when Bitcoin was dumping very hard a couple of months ago that Binance filled the mempool. They basically filled around 20 blocks. And my interpretation of this is that they were trying to make it harder to withdraw, or at least more expensive, to discourage you from doing it.
Or at least to give them an excuse to not making it easy to withdraw.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, in that example, it could have also just as been that they needed to go do a bunch of transactions suddenly, and they needed, they wanted to go and collect a bunch of UTXOs together, and someone just screwed up the script and didn't do it right. Like that's the kind of thing that happens when people are panicking and they need to move a lot of money around quickly because they can't otherwise meet withdrawals.
That's a nice explanation, but I'm not sure if that's the case, but let's say it is, and it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that we made blocks bigger with SegWit affects the security in the long term?
Not by much, because we didn't make blocks very much bigger.
In a sense, I like the fact that you can have slightly bigger blocks. We did see 1.6 megabyte blocks on a regular basis. We had a couple of blocks larger than 2 megabytes, which was interesting to see. It also happened...
In theory they can be up to 4 megabytes, but it's you're unlikely to have the right transaction pattern for that to happen.
I know that Nick Szabo proposed at one point that we can have an emission of blocks which takes a longer time.
What do you mean takes a longer time?
As in delayed block production to increase the amount of fees that are being paid for that transaction.
I'm not sure what you mean there. You mean like making blocks take longer than 10 minutes on average, or what?
Yeah, pretty much. I think his proposal for BitGold was kind of similar.
Okay, all right, but we're talking about something to be like hard fork on Bitcoin, or he's not talking about like modification to Bitcoin itself. Because Bitcoin's 10 minutes interval, I mean, that's very hard coded into the core proof of work protocol. Like there's no easy way to go and modify that at all.
Yeah, about the 10 minutes, I have a question which I guess is very relevant because there is no oracle to tell Bitcoin what time it is, and it doesn't use a specific time zone. So how does Bitcoin know when 10 minutes have passed to produce a new block?
Well, I mean, that's complex. So the 10 minutes, well, first of all, remember, it's not that Bitcoin, I mean, like, all right, let's be clear. Do you realize like mining is a Poisson process? Like blocks are not created, or mining is a Poisson process. Blocks are not created on a schedule.
Yeah, I
blocks
do know
are created on average 10 minutes, but that's only an average. Yeah, and the way that the 10 minutes is obtained is by adjusting difficulty so that on average with a given amount of hash power, you will find a block every 10 minutes. And then the difficulty adjustment, the way that happens is by looking at the block timestamps, which is, something that all miners collectively contribute to. So like Bitcoin does not measure time accurately. Bitcoin miners put a timestamp claiming they think the time is roughly this, but it's only that they collectively like contribute to this sort of average time. There's not like a clear oracle here. And the only way that's really enforced is, one direction, Bitcoin miners don't want the difficulty to become higher. And in the other direction, nodes reject blocks with a timestamp greater than 2 hours into the future from, what time they think it is, which is kind of a weak thing. Like if there are certain ways that this could be exploited, and Bitcoin doesn't have great, it's not really clear like how this plays out game theory wise. So that's a very ugly corner of Bitcoin, if you will.
That's interesting. I haven't heard this explanation before. So basically, the miners are the oracles.
Well, the oracle isn't a great term for this. Miners are just putting timestamps in their blocks as to roughly when they think the block was created, which will always be rough because miners actually use the timestamp, the time field, as part of the nonce, because the nonce field wasn't big enough. So they use the time field as part of the nonce to go get a few more bits to go and roll, to go, when they're doing the proof of work calculation.
Okay. I'm happy that I asked because this always puzzled me. Like how is this enforced? I can understand the idea of a difficulty readjustment that happens every 2016 blocks, but at the same time, how do you keep that from getting messed up?
Yeah. Well, a key thing is the difficulty readjustment, the data that goes into it is the time fields in the blocks themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So between the time field in a block, 2016 blocks ago and now, I think it might be median time. I'd have to double check the details, but it's looking at that time in that data. It's not looking at wall clock, and it can't because everyone's clock will be different.
So I'm not sure if we finished the topic about adding tail emission to Bitcoin, but I guess actually it does require a hard fork. And something that I want to ask you is, let's say that we do hard fork.
It mostly requires a hard fork. So remember, tail emission, it could also be implemented as a forced soft fork, where miners basically make the chain a merged mine chain of itself. Thus, if you have an existing Bitcoin core node, it would go follow the new chain, but suddenly you wouldn't see any transactions in it. So that's that's one way to do it.
What do you mean by forced soft fork? That's like
Well, it's when you do a
soft
soft
fork.
No, it's semantics for 51% attack. Right? It's where you go make the entire like where you go make a soft fork where, I mean, the simple way to do it is the definition of soft fork is that the only thing in the new chain is now this, Coinbase that commits to a hash of the actual block in the new system. And thus people running existing software would just go see empty blocks forever.
Okay, so that's another way to do it with a forced soft fork.
Yep. And the other thing is you can do the economic equivalent of tail emission with Demurrage, where you make the transaction fee dependent on the value being moved. And the cleaner way to do that is to take the part of the transaction fee based on the value and assign it to a pool of coins that then all miners get access to, without without any particular preference, right? So that, this pool of money just goes back to all miners. And that's it's very close to what tail emission does, except the actual amount of the tail emission would be somewhat dependent on the amount of coins actually in circulation, whereas pure hard fork tail emission would be a fixed amount. But you basically get pretty much the same thing in both cases. And again, that could be a soft fork because fees can be increased by soft fork.
But if fees are a percentage of the amount being transacted, and let's say that we do add privacy into Bitcoin, is that not a factor which reveals the amount being transacted, which ruins the privacy?
First of all, us adding, layer on-chain privacy is very unlikely because that radically changes the proposition of Bitcoin for security. If you buy Monero, you are putting a lot of faith in a lot of complex math. And if that math fucks up, well, you can easily lose everything due to hidden inflation. So I don't see Bitcoin adding, layer 0 privacy. That's not that likely to happen. It's a really risky thing because you are relying on the math to work perfectly, and every coin that has done it has had at least one inflation bug that could have destroyed the entire currency.
What's your take on extension blocks
hang on,
and stuff
one sec. Also, let's be clear. If you needed to go and add a fee based on that, you could probably go do it, even while protecting the privacy anyway, by just having some fancy math thing where you go and prove that your fee was sufficient.
So like zero knowledge proofs.
Yeah, you could easily do. I mean, it would depend on the specifics of the protocol, but it would not be like you'd expect to be able to go do zero knowledge proof that the fee you paid was sufficient for the amount of coins you transacted. I'm sure Zcash could pull this off. Monero probably could too.
I mean, it's too late for you to submit proposals to Zcash, I guess.
Well, Monero's already adopted tail emission
gears, which I won in an auction.
Yeah.
I still have your broken laptop, so I'm not sure if that's worth anything, but it's a nice piece of cypherpunk history.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm grateful that you picked me for that bidding war, which I guess was underwhelming for you. Maybe you were expecting to make a lot more money off of it. It has a nice story behind it.
I mean, the amount was perfectly fine. Like, to make more, that'd be a bit surprising, to be honest. And I wasn't exactly like putting much effort into getting a higher price.
Yeah, you're not.
If I was to really push for a higher price, I would have done a bidding. I would have done an auction with fixed time frame over a longer period of time, et cetera, which I never bothered to do.
Yeah, I'm happy that I have this.
Yeah.
The light just became harder in my room. Anyway, we were talking about privacy on Bitcoin. So you're saying that it's unlikely that we will ever have any kind of base layer privacy added.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, it's quite a risky thing to have because it makes, it creates vulnerabilities where coins can be inflated out of thin air and you could lose the entire currency due to a simple technical mistake. Zcash has had, well, let's see, I think they're up to like inflation bug number 3 by now. that they've had, if you include one that was caught prior to release. Maybe it was two, but anyway, there's certainly one that was like got quite a lot of press about it. And there might be a hidden inflation bug in there somewhere. Monero's, I think they've had at least one, maybe two.
Yeah,
these are all things that could kill the entire currency.
That's not something that we would ever want from BTC, which is the most valuable network.
Yeah. And frankly, like, why do you really need this given you have Lightning? Lightning works really well for privacy. Like, I think that's overall a better solution, particularly because it scales for privacy than any of the on-chain stuff.
So are you saying that Lightning is better than, say, Monero?
I think all things considered, like Lightning for the average, the thing you gotta remember, Monero is quite attractive to dark markets because the privacy in Monero is forced. It's much harder to make a mistake with Monero because you just have to go do transactions with privacy to use Monero. With Lightning, the way Lightning has developed makes that a bit more dubious. And like people can use Lightning wallets without as great privacy as they really need to have to be sending money to like the dark web. But Monero could have developed differently. I mean, Monero, we could have had more users holding their coins on hosted wallets with no privacy, and then Monero might not be so attractive. Similarly, with Lightning, we could have a world where more people use Lightning with their own hosted wallets, and then you get very good privacy. So, there's a bit of both, but I think overall, to add privacy in general to a coin while also scaling it up, Lightning is just the obvious choice. Like Monero just doesn't scale. Zcash does not scale. I'm sorry, these projects will always be niche things because they just don't scale.
I do recall that at one point you were auditing code for a Grin fork of sorts. So you do know how MimbleWimble works, and I'm not sure if you paid attention to how it developed in the meantime. But I think something interesting that was done in the space lately is Litecoin's addition of extension blocks with MimbleWimble. And
I did a little bit of work of reviewing that.
I did test it. It's pretty cool, but I can see why it would be super unpopular.
But Grin fundamentally, like, it's A, still doesn't scale, and B, it's closer to CoinJoin in what it provides. Because it's an interactive process to go and do the, to get the privacy out of it and to get the compaction.
I guess adding anything on an extension block is a bona fide block size increase.
Well, that too, yep.
And it also gives more power to the miners.
And takes away the ability of people to validate.
Yep.
Yep.
So that's why it would be super unpopular. But at the same time, the MimbleWimble stuff, as far as I understand it, transactions get pruned, so you only see the first one and the second one from every block.
That's not quite true. Like, you wind up with sort of a kernel for each sort of input, basically. It's not fully pruned quite the way people like talk about it. Plus, the process of doing that's, you got to go interact with other people, to some extent, and that's, that process can also mean losing privacy there. So it's not quite as good as people made it out to be.
Okay, now I know that you did not create it, because otherwise you'd defend it.
Yeah. No, Lightning is just overall so much better than all this stuff. Like the fact is Lightning is a routed system. Routing inherently allows you to do scalability things that other systems just can't do.
Yeah, I do recall the last time I met you in person that you were so happy about your Phoenix wallet. And
it works very well.
You still recommend it.
Yep. It'd be nice to get more easy to use Lightning wallets, which use your own node, but give it time. People develop that stuff.
Did you have time to look into Breeze?
I've looked at it a bit, but it doesn't allow you to, it doesn't expose what you need to do to use LND implementation under the hood very well.
I think Breeze uses C Lightning or Lightning Core, whatever they call it.
Well, I thought it was LND. I could be wrong on that. But anyway, whatever the heck it uses, it doesn't expose in a user-friendly way what you need to do to actually use that with your own node. You know, you can kind of hack it together by the developer tools, but it's not like, say, a Claire wallet, as an example, allowed you to do that, but a Claire hasn't been maintained.
I think Phoenix is based on Eclair or async stuff.
Well, I don't know it's based on it code-wise, but it's was developed after Eclair. Like the code base could be entirely different, though. I just don't know. Okay.
This segues.
Phoenix does use trampoline routing, though. Like that's a key thing it uses. Mm-hmm. So it relies on another node to actually do the routing decisions.
This is where it gets very complicated with Lightning, because when I try to explain it to people, it's like you have islands that are your nodes and you have roads that you build from one island to the other. And when you build the bridge to another island, you can only send supplies to that island. But if you want to receive, you need that other island to also build a bridge with you. And basically you benefit from
Lightning is as complex as the real world. Like Lightning is as complex as the way the internet works under the hood. You know, it's as complex as the way like grocery stores work under the hood. I mean, all these things are based on routing stuff between warehouses and, you know, nodes and things like that. It's just the nature of it. But like you need that complexity to go scale. Like that's just a fundamental thing of comp sci. Any alternative to Lightning that uses a chain just doesn't scale. You know, any other system will never be able to go pay by the minute for podcasts. It's just not going to happen. Lightning can pull this off.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I haven't received Lightning payments on, what's it called, Sphinx in a while. I think people have moved on to a cooler app, which is called Fountain or whatever. And I did not sign up to that one, but still, it's pretty cool when it happens.
The fact it can even happen at all is really what's impressive about Lightning. You know, you just cannot do the equivalent to that on something like Monero. It'll never scale.
Let me ask you something that's equally unpopular. I was not going to ask you this, but since you mentioned it, you seem to be so excited about Lightning, you think it can outlive Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, Lightning, the idea, will certainly outlive Bitcoin because it's just a fundamental like principle of comp sci. Like the discovery of Lightning was finding one of the ways to go and do double spend prevention. That's pretty much what it was. So certainly if Bitcoin dies and another currency takes its place, then you'd expect Lightning to get developed on top of it, or, you know, some entirely new revolution that we can't even predict. But, you know, that's not really saying like Lightning will outlive Bitcoin. It's that another currency could also go influence Lightning. And it probably would, because Lightning is just a good idea.
It's network agnostic. It doesn't matter where you put it. It's going to work the exact same. It's interoperable.
But I mean, but say Lightning is network agnostic, I think a bit misleading. The Lightning concept under the hood can do that, but people haven't actually made Lightning nodes that really are network agnostic in the way that you could route payments through them and stuff like that. There's very little of that going on. Vast majority of Lightning usage is just on Bitcoin, end of story. You know, to say that like the fact that, you know, someone could go take that code and then run on top of Litecoin isn't really saying it's network agnostic. Much the same way as like my own Python Bitcoin library, people quite successfully take that code and use it to do like Litecoin transactions because basic principles are the same. Doesn't mean that, you know, it's network agnostic. It's just a code base that can be retrofitted to do something else. Like for true network agnosticness, you got to go look at when people start doing intercoin Lightning transactions, which is theoretically possible, but requires a lot of software that for the most part isn't really well developed.
Yeah, and since we are talking about privacy a bit, I guess first of all, I want to ask you, how would you recommend people to use the Lightning Network in a private way? Open private channels with each other?
Well, I mean, how much work do you want to do? Like, if you want to, the simplest way to do it, if you're willing to install LND, is just install LND and use it. You know, you don't need your channels to be private. The fact is, like, other people have a hard time observing who you're paying anyway. That's plenty enough.
I did listen to a comment in regards to how Chainalysis can get involved, at least in the ranking of nodes. And if you run your node on top of Tor, or you come from a country that is undesirable by whichever international law, then you're not going to get as much routing from their trusted nodes, to call them so.
So, I mean, like, the nature of Lightning is people can go and use it between themselves if they choose to, and you can equally use it outside. I mean, the fact of the matter is, right now, if I want to go send money to, you know, Binance, well, actually, no, Binance will do, Bitfinex is one example, or Kraken's another example. I'm quite free to just open a channel to either them directly or a node that's connected through them and send money through there. You know, people aren't doing AML KYC on the Lightning level itself. In theory, they could, but I mean, that's not really a problem. Like, that's not a fault of Lightning per se. I mean, this is just a fundamental problem that all these technologies face. You know, Lightning does as good a job as you can possibly imagine it to. And in this circumstance where, you know, as an example, I want to go pay Kraken with some coins, I don't want it to be obvious where the coins came from. The moment I'm one hop removed from Kraken through Lightning, well, now, unless those nodes go collude, Kraken's just not going to know where the money came from. I mean, that's just how Lightning works, and it works very well at that. That's far better privacy than any on-chain thing that you could get on Bitcoin. You know, with, of course, the exception of just doing something like CoinJoin, which has its own kind of trade-offs there and own failure modes. But the beauty of Lightning is that these transactions are ephemeral. You know, once you've done them, there's no data being there's no data being spread to other people about what's really happened. Only the sort of, at best, vague information about possible channel balance changes, which is hard to go aggregate and use. So I'd say it's it's very good privacy. There's situations where it isn't great, but it works very well.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned CoinJoins, and you did tweet something positive about Wasabi and their show sponsor, so I'm going to have to ask you about that. What do you think about their 2.0 wallet?
It seems to work pretty well. I go use it. It initially was taking a while for CoinJoins to happen, but it seems like they fixed a few issues. Of course, Tor was getting DDoS at the same time, which caused some issues, but, you know, currently it's been working pretty well for me. I think it would be nice if it exposed more technical info about, for instance, what UTXOs I had and so on. But obviously that requires time and effort to write code to do. So I think it's fine that they released it the way it is. I haven't had any issues with it. And
also,
I really like.
Let me teach you a cheat code in Wasabi 2.0. You hold Control.C plus C plus D, so Control CD, and you get the UTXO window.
Well, there you go. I think it would be nice if they could expose that better, but it's fine if they don't.
Yeah, it's like they have a developer mode that's under the hood, and you need to use this hotkey, this combination of keys to be able to access it. But you can use it, and you can do pretty much the exact same stuff. But you need to remember that you have to press Control plus C plus D.
Well, now I can go try that.
Yeah, you should.
See, something I think they do a really nice job on is when you make a payment, they'll go suggest to you how to go do the payment more privately, such as by paying slightly more or slightly less to not have a change address, which is quite nice. You know, I actually use that all the time because often, like, one of the main things I use Wasabi for is taking coins, using them to then fund Lightning channels, and then actually go send my money through there.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty cool use case. I did see, so being involved in this discussion about privacy, there's a lot of rivalry, and there's also the guy who designed the Wasabi protocol who's not happy about some design specifications that he would have done differently. There was a bit of drama there. But I think it works pretty well so far.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not ideal. There's still work to be done.
Yeah. I haven't followed the drama too closely, and frankly, a lot of that's because, when I look at the Samourai wallet drama, a lot of it just immediately looks like a pile of bullshit. Like when you see how much hate so much that community has for Lightning, it's immediate red flag that, they're not actually talking about things honestly. They're, trying to go generate hype, because it's just unquestionable that Lightning works very well for certain things. And I'm sorry, but that's just true. And if you try to claim otherwise, you're claiming to be a privacy wallet, I'm getting very dubious about you.
I did see that Greg Maxwell was a lot less diplomatic than you in terms of calling them out for their false claims about privacy.
Well, if I remembered exactly what the hell they'd done that was bad, I would probably do that too. I think it was, like, if I remember correctly, their wallets, you wind up giving them your chain code or whatever, so they do get to see all the coins in your wallet, which is just scary. I believe Wasabi uses neutrino filters.
Yeah, exactly. By default, if you download Samourai on your wallet, you're going to expose to them the XPub, so they know which addresses belong to you, how much money you have, with whom you transact, and all of this information.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite possible the whole thing's a big honeypot, and they're just working. Like, quite possible that Samourai is actually just a subsidiary of Chainalysis.
They do have a blockchain analysis firm which they acquired, but for white hat reasons, right?
Yeah, you never know with this stuff. Like, I just don't trust them because of technical decisions like that and statements that they've made like that. So
I also spoke with people who looked at their code, and they said it's a mess and it's suboptimal.
Yeah, could be true. I haven't looked at Samourai's code. I mean, their choice to use was it .NET or Mono or whatever it's called is a little weird, but it's not unforgivable.
I do have a question from someone who wrote questions from the audience, and he wants to know about BIP 47. And this is something that Samourai does. They call it the Paynym. It's a pseudonym.
Oh, yeah, that thing. Yeah.
Is basically associated with your XPub, and you don't have to generate a new address every time you receive a payment. You just have that one.
I haven't looked into how that actually works. I don't really have anything to say on that because I just haven't looked into it.
It sounds like a good idea, but it can also be exploited in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where overall Lightning seems to do that kind of job better anyway. It's certainly inconvenient that you actually need to somehow have a node online to receive payments. But, overall, if I want you to go send me some money, I'd rather you just send it over Lightning.
I feel like you should be a spokesperson for LND. You'd make a lot of money. They should pay you.
No, I barely talked to any of those people. They none of them paid me anything. I'm just telling the truth based on what I've seen it. I mean, maybe what you're seeing here is I'm just so excited about an idea that did basically what I was proposing better, that I'd rather go promote it than do the hard work of fleshing out my idea, which will never work as well as LND anyway.
Why do you like LND so much? Some people refer to it as being unreliable as opposed to C Lightning, but maybe that's just the C Lightning marketing.
Well, C Lightning is crazy. Like, writing a new complex application in C in this time of day, it's nuts. It's completely nuts. C Lightning, like, the fact C Lightning is written in C is such a terrible idea. I will never trust them. Now, Rust Lightning, on the other hand, if they ever actually get a comprehensive node implementation, that could be quite good software. But, LND is really, your best option there. And of course, what's the name, Async or whatever, I'm sure their node implementation is fine. It runs Phoenix, it runs the backends that Phoenix, and Phoenix seems to work well. So it's probably fine. Although, all these somewhat more obscure languages aren't things I really know much about.
Do you have anything to say about stealth addresses or silent payments? This is a question from Tony Sanok.
Yeah, my old stuff. It was an idea that had a time and place, and I don't think they're too relevant anymore. You know, it would be nice if someone goes and gets that to work well, but I'm just not seeing it happening anytime soon. And, you know, it's kind of a niche thing.
So you're saying that CoinJoins are pretty good and use them to open Lightning channels, and you prefer Lightning for privacy. Is this an accurate summary?
Yep. That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Okay. What are the limitations that you would like to point out for CoinJoins, or the trade-offs?
I mean, I think, of course, one big limitation is they're on-chain transactions and they're expensive. Like, you know, you're adding another transaction. In most cases, realistically, you're adding another transaction to your transaction, and that'll just fundamentally be expensive. Also, like, people have rarely done CoinJoins where, for instance, ideally, I would say, all right, I have some coins. I want to go schedule a payment to this other address. Please do a CoinJoin in the process. And like Samourai or Wasabi, I think in theory could support this, but I just, you know, they obviously just haven't done it yet. Whereas the current way, it basically involves doing one more transaction in between, which is just more money. And, you know, it's not ideal.
I'm not trying to speak on their behalf. Most likely they're going to have an announcement about it. But I did hear something about experimenting with the idea of opening channels directly from your CoinJoins.
Well, I mean, that totally would be like that. That's an example of what I was just talking about, actually. It's a bit more complex example because with opening channels, you need a bit more coordination. But, you know, certainly people need to do this stuff. It's just, you know, no matter what, CoinJoins will always be a bit more inconvenient. And of course, the fact that you are doing a transaction means you're going to pay more money than something that's purely on Lightning. But, you know, when you do an on-chain transaction, CoinJoins just make sense. Like that's just the nature of it. And in fact, in certain cases, particularly if we ever get signature aggregation, CoinJoins will fundamentally be cheaper than not doing CoinJoins.
So do you see a future where every Bitcoin block is going to be a large CoinJoin?
Well, it probably wouldn't be one large CoinJoin, but probably like a couple large CoinJoins. I mean, keep in mind, like there are cases where you deliberately do not want to do a transaction with privacy. You know, there are some use cases where you actually want your transaction to be out in the open entirely. And that's okay too. I mean, some people have that use, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the future, like half of every block is just CoinJoins.
I guess this isn't just a technical issue, it's also a social one in terms of accepting that privacy is legit and should exist on Bitcoin. Yeah. As we seem to have all of these new actors who get involved and they're like, it's so nice that we can track every payment and we know who sent to whom.
Well, look, I mean, the world is full of power-hungry psychopaths. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Anyone who says that, you know, money should have no privacy is a power-hungry psychopath. That's just how it is. And the nice thing about stuff like Lightning and stuff like certain types of CoinJoins is you create a system where this is the default path because it is actually cheaper. You know, Lightning inherently has good privacy by the fact that it scales well. It always will have good privacy. Like you cannot make Lightning not have at least somewhat better privacy against some threat model than on-chain Bitcoin, because Lightning inherently cannot broadcast, you know, your transactions to the rest of the world, or it wouldn't scale. And the fact that it has this inherent level of privacy is very nice. Plus, it's very useful that on top of this stuff that you just have to implement, they also decided to do onion routing, which is really important. You know, soon they'll also have onion routing for receivers as well. I forget what the heck that's called or what the BIPs were, but, you know, effectively, like as a receiver, of course, currently Lightning, you give up your node's identity, which does have some privacy considerations. Not as much as I think people try to say, because, you know, you're not saying every transaction you're getting, but you're showing some info. And Lightning will, in the future, have receiver privacy where the last hop that the sender knows about then goes on to a few more steps of onion routing. So, you know, that'll be nice to have. But it's just, you just want to build these things into the protocols at the low level. And it's good when it just happens naturally.
Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro, gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro.
Voltoro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There is no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip. And if you're into gold custody, Voltoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Voltoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015, they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to voltoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels.
Right. So, Peter, you have about a dozen questions from people on Twitter, and there's no way we can cover this extensively.
Yeah.
We will both get tired and run out of energy.
Yeah.
And possibly have back problems from sitting too much. But let's do this in a rapid fire fashion, which means that I'm going to ask you the question and you try to provide a brief 30-second answer.
Sure.
So SOD at Oracle My Ars wants to know, what do you think about Taro?
Taro. Oh yeah, that the L&D assets thing. I've got the email sitting in my inbox because I got to go read carefully over all the specs and whatnot still. But it looks interesting enough, and it's interesting how the RGB guys are basically saying that Taro rips them off. So Taro might be a good thing by virtue of ripping off something else is good.
Okay. This comes from me, actually, because I'm curious to know what you think about Counterparty and if you believe that it's an attack on Bitcoin.
Well, Counterparty was an interesting idea, kind of a bit badly implemented, I think. But whether or not it's an attack on Bitcoin, I think it's really a philosophical question. And the more useful question to ask is, can you go stop it? And with things like what RGB has been working on, what I've been working on, so on, the answer there is no, you can't stop it. So it's somewhat irrelevant.
Yeah,
but certainly, assets are useful. Yeah.
But when you mention stuff that you have been working on, is it RGB related?
Yeah, like, my single use seal work and so on.
Alexi at IPHIGEN Alexi. I don't know how you read that, but anyway, what are your thoughts on the
Alexi.
security of remote attestation and possible applications in Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, funny enough, the biggest remote attestation scheme, SGX, Intel just discontinued it for consumer hardware. So, I mean, it doesn't look like the future of remote attestation is very good. Intel still offers SGX for sort of so-called enterprise hardware, but SGX on consumer hardware, no, actually, I think SGX on both did have a bunch of exploits. So, I wouldn't put much faith in it. I really wouldn't.
Carlos at Cosmos is within wants to know if Bitcoin is a social consensus. How can you change the social consensus of a Mexican standoff? Hard forks are not cool.
Well, Bitcoin, I think, is a social consensus. And you change social consensuses in lots of ways. I mean, one way would be to go invite everyone to go have a nice big powwow in a nice big place and maybe smoke some opium and do some LSD. And, maybe we'd all love each other. Maybe we'd just agree to do a hard fork. Or maybe agree that we didn't need to do one in the first place.
Nice.
I think there's a Rick and Morty scene along these lines.
I haven't looked at Rick and Morty since season 3.
You should. It's good. Yeah.
I will after this. So C-Funk Celia wants to know, how have you felt about the Johnny Depp defamation case?
Yes. I mean, I think it's good that justice gets served there. And I think it's shifting it's really shifting the entire ecosystem in terms of, how we look at this crazy idea of believe all women. I don't know it really has that much relevance in the Bitcoin community because the Bitcoin community never seemed to be that crazy. But it's good that the way that the Bitcoin community thinks is becoming more like, or I should say, the rest of the world thinks becoming more like the way the Bitcoin community thinks on that. So it's good to see happen.
My cat says hi, by the way. He just came into the room.
I will say hi, and your cat will probably ignore me.
Most likely. I think he wants to get on my lap. Anyway, Dark Tetrad Simul X BIP 118 wants to know, as miner incentives drop and the recommended settlement time goes up for large transactions to prevent double spends, would you advocate for option A, on-chain stuff with the OP_CTV or payment codes to drive up fees? Option 2, hard forking for inflation. Option 3, do nothing and see what happens.
I think option 2 and option 3 are your only sane ones. And option, it's, when you have to add that much complexity to try to go and get fees paid, I don't think you're in a good place. And when the fact is, right now, Bitcoin, you basically never see reorgs to do a tax. If we start seeing them, period, that's a really bad sign. And reorgs are things that bigger miners can do more effectively than smaller, which causes so many incentive problems. You don't want to be anywhere near that mode of operation. So hopefully this won't be a problem. And if not, inflation is just such a cleaner way to do it. Or, Demurrage if you really have to do it with soft fork.
CoinSure wants to know which city in the world has the best Negronis. What's Negronis? Negronis?
Alcoholic drink. I'm not so much a fan of them. I mean, I'm a fan of Aperol Spritz, though. And for that, you really got to go to Milan.
Okay. That was a strange one. Florin, who's also Romanian, wants to know, who chose you to become a Bitcoin Core developer and how do you become a Bitcoin Core developer?
You chose me to become a Bitcoin Core developer. And by you, I mean all Bitcoin people. Because the only reason you get called a Bitcoin Core developer is when people start calling you Bitcoin Core developer. This was actually quite funny early on because I'd start getting journalists say I was Bitcoin Core developer. And it wasn't really clear what they were basing that on. They're to the extent there is an official list, I was never on it. I was never on the PGP signing keys or whatever. So one definition is by Bitcoin Core developer, you contribute to Bitcoin Core and your name's in the Git repo. but like hundreds of people's names are in the Git repo. So there's nothing that interesting about that. Again, this is one of those like fuzzy social consensus things.
Yeah, by that standard, I guess I'm also a Bitcoin core developer of sorts, because I fixed something on the website.
Yeah. My first contribution to Bitcoin Core was to go and fix a grammar mistake in some documentation. And in the process, I introduced a spelling mistake, which then Peter Rule had to go remind me to go fix.
That's a nice story.
Yeah, it's a good start. Anyone can do that. My first contribution to LND, which was only a few months ago, was similar.
I found something which is not really a question, but he says that you're an interesting guy. His name is Adventure Doctor on Twitter. He says he was here, I'm not sure what here means, in 2018 for a conference, and you put on a talk. We were all up in the Bull Bitcoin office, fun talk. I hope you reminisce with, I don't know, pleasure or whatever.
Well, Adventure Doctor, I'm sure you are equally as exciting.
I think he is a plane pilot of sorts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have 3 more questions, which are from a different thread. HCCB, who I think is also Canadian, wants to know how will the BTC philosophy promote good practice and sustainability in general? As a restorer, which I guess is his job, the reason for the new building industry is often simply a question of forcing a fake economy, triple pan windows and whatever. So sustainability in general.
Well, I think the Austrian approach to answering that question would be go say that Bitcoin takes away the ability to go inflate money and thus reduces the ability to create subsidies, go and do all kinds of economically distorting things. We wouldn't see building booms in quite the same way if Bitcoin was a global currency, because you just couldn't, you couldn't go and raise the funds with cheap debt to go do it. So arguably that's good for that kind of sustainable economy. I mean, a way to think about inflation is a tax on savings. And if you tax savings, you're forcing people to spend money. If you don't tax savings, people can save money and they don't have, they're not forced to go build things.
I mean, that makes sense unless you know that you can print tokens on Bitcoin, on Counterparty, Omni, Taro, RGB, and the government.
Yeah, but you can print a bunch of worthless tokens.
They can print tokens and be like, give me 1 Bitcoin and I'm going to give you 10 of my tokens. And I promise you that.
But now you're
2 Bitcoin.
But now you're talking about fiat again, or various forms of that.
Sure, but there's no way to stop it. That's what I mean. Technically, you can perpetuate it.
I think as far as you can go, there will always be scams in the world, but in a healthy, normal economy, after a reasonable amount of time for people to figure out what scams exist, there'll always be a small part of the overall economy, and they can be a much bigger part if you have fiat currency, in the sense that the fiat currency is itself a scam. Now, again, this is Austrian economics way of looking at things, but if you subscribe to that viewpoint, Bitcoin is certainly good for overall sustainability.
Aladdin92i wants to know if you see a future in home mining and securing the network as a user.
Well, I think if I see a future, the answer really should be, do I expect it to be profitable? And I'm sure it could be profitable for certain types of people in certain places. If you happen to have cheap power and can also go and make use of the heat provided by mining, yeah, it could absolutely make sense. Right now, there's a bunch of sort of semi-artificial barriers, including like lack of available ASICs, et cetera, et cetera. But, I personally know people who do home mining and say they make money on it. So, there's no structural reason why there wouldn't be a future in it. You just need the right products to be created and the overall system to be in the right state. And I think an important part of being in the right state is to have a reasonably stable mining subsidy. Because if mining is only paid by transaction fees are likely to be very unstable in how much they actually are, which makes it much harder to go run a profitable mining operation on a small scale, because you need to think, how do you go deal with these unstable fees? How do you make money on this? Whereas if mining is something where you just turn on a box and money comes out reliably and predictably, it's much easier to mine on a small scale and still make money.
Yeah, I think there's a huge case to be made for ideological mining, doing it not because it's profitable, but because you want the network to work for yourself.
I mean, let's be clear. I'm not talking about ideological mining here. I'm talking about mining being profitable on a small scale. And there's good reason to think mining will be profitable on a small scale. But part of what makes it possible is having mining being a healthy, stable environment. And the inflation subsidy does a very good job of doing that. And this may not be true if mining is a fee-only thing.
I think that this interview came full circle. We started from inflation subsidy and we ended with this.
Yep.
There's no way to convince you that it's a bad idea, and you're going to talk about it nonetheless. When I first had you on the podcast in February of 2019, you spoke about inflation, but I guess not many people were listening at the time.
Yep.
They got triggered now of all the moments when they could have. It's almost as if they only discovered...
People were triggered the first time I mentioned 2016 on Twitter. I had a reply to Matthew Green saying that I thought, Bitcoin should have had perpetual inflation forever at some low rate.
And you've been consistent, I guess, but the reaction was not as great as last month, or when was it? Pretty recently.
If you put a paper on the internet with a bunch of differential equations, people seem to listen more than a, 70 letter tweet.
Which is good. There should be more papers with differential equations. And I wanted to ask you one last question about your paper. You're making an assumption about lost coins, and you're justifying the addition of inflation as a means to compensate for the coins which are forever inaccessible.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the two things happen to go cancel out. That's not a justification. That's just observing the fact that these two things happen to cancel out naturally.
Okay, so it's not consequential. It's more like...
Well, so it's consequential because of just how the math works, right? Like one thing is a fixed number, whereas the other thing is a number that depends on the total coin supply. Mm-hmm. And that it just happens to be that the math cancels out in that case because the coin supply winds up adjusting itself to the point where those two factors cancel out.
Yeah, I feel like this opens the floodgates to determine when you can consider that some coins were lost.
No, not at all. No, you got to understand the nature of the math means that whatever this rate is, it will automatically cancel out. There's no human consideration here whatsoever about what a lost coin is or whatever. It's if a coin is actually lost in the long run, those lost coins will eventually go cancel out because that's just how the math works. It's not, there's no definition of what a lost coin is in this. It's saying that if you have a definition, like if you have lost coins, which is inevitable, the total actual supply of non-lost coins will wind up stabilizing. It's like gravity almost, it doesn't matter like what you talk about your definitions. This will just happen, and it's got nothing to do with you. And you don't need to define, you don't need to put in the system a definition of lost coins. It'll just happen. Now, the consequence of this is that the figures that you get out of the system, such as, well, what is the total coin supply? That's very hard to know because that is a figure we would take from from the total number of coins in existence. But there's no way to turn that into how many coins are lost without making assumptions. An assumption you could make, for example, is that any coin which has moved in the past, say, 2 years is definitely not lost, right? If you do that on Bitcoin, you find that we're pretty sure that at least 80% of the coins haven't been lost. It might be 90%. It's something like that. But do we know that the number is actually 90? No, we don't. It could be 95. It could be 99. We just don't know. You have to start making assumptions. But the math doesn't care about the assumptions you make. That's what will happen.
I guess I'm too dumb to understand your math completely, but it's fine. I'm going to let someone
read through some of the other explanations people have written. because you don't need to understand differential equation to understand this. In fact, I mean, I didn't solve that differential equation myself. I just threw it at Wolfram Alpha and sanity checked the way Wolfram Alpha told me to go solve it. You know, like solving differential equations from scratch without help is kind of annoying. On the other hand, double checking someone else's solution to it isn't so bad. So I just told Wolfram Alpha to go solve it for me, then checked that the solution I got was sane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
We'll
Peter,
read up on more of that.
for
Well, thank
this
you.
interview. It's kind of funny that you're low on energy when replying to other questions, and now at the end, when I finally ask you something that triggers you, you're like, oh, in defense
Well,
mode.
math is just so beautiful. I will defend my beautiful math forever.
Plus, as you previously stated, you're always up for a fight.
Always.
Keep
All
fighting,
right, thank
Peter.
you.
Thank you very much.
All right, talk later. Bye.
Commercial break. Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro. Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro. Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro. Gold and Bitcoin on Voltoro.
Voltoro is the exchange where you deal with honest and hard money. There's no fiat on-ramp or off-ramp, and you get to diversify your Bitcoin portfolio into gold or silver when you sense that a bearish moment is coming. Also, you can instantly trade your gold for Bitcoin to buy the dip. And if you're into gold custody, Voltoro can also send you the gold that you own directly from their insured Swiss vaulting facilities. Voltoro was launched in the aftermath of the Mt. Gox hack, so since 2015, they have published monthly glass books to prove that they own all the gold reserves and all of their customers' money. Sign up today by going to voltoro.com/Bitcoin takeover. Keep in mind that this is not financial advice and you are responsible for your own decisions. Wasabi Wallet is the perfect Bitcoin privacy wallet. It's free, it's open source, it's available on Windows, macOS, and Linux, and it offers groundbreaking Chaumian CoinJoins, which makes your Bitcoin. Even if you do not use the CoinJoin feature, you still benefit from a trustless experience with block filters, a hidden IP address via Tor, and easy management of your wallet outputs. After you deal with KYC exchanges like Coinbase, like Kraken, Binance, Gemini, or Bitfinex, you can remove the association between your identity and your Bitcoin address by performing a few rounds of CoinJoins. To find out more about the privacy benefits and limitations of CoinJoins, listen to Bitcoin Takeover Podcast Season 6, Episode 6 with Max Hilbrand. And if you want to give Wasabi a try, go to wasabiwallet.io and download the wallet for free. Wasabi Wallet, a Bitcoin privacy wallet for the citadels.